Hi, I'm Charles, and you're watching The State of the Republic. We begin this week with the continued push for gun control legislation that has sprung out of the Parkland shooting. Last week saw the March for Our Lives, with hundreds of marches nationwide to protest the lack of action against gun violence. 800,000 people attended the march in Washington, D.C., and the speeches were both inspiring and saddening. I personally attended the march in downtown Atlanta, where over 30,000 people turned out. The reactionary right has continued to attack the Parkland kids, spreading conspiracy theory nonsense and attacking them personally. Conservative propagandist Laura Ingraham attacked Parkland survivor David Hogg for not getting into the colleges he preferred. And Hogg has struck back by calling for a boycott of Ingram's advertisers. After the advertisers started dropping her like a hot potato, Ingraham issued a rather pathetic and clearly insincere non-apology apology. A reminder, when she was in college in the 1980s, Ingraham worked with another right-wing jagoff and now convicted criminal, Dinesh D'Souza, to out gay students against their will. Ingram's sponsors have continued to drop like flies, and she is now being sent off on vacation until things blow over. A reminder, Bill O'Reilly was also sent on vacation near the end, and he never really returned from his vacation to run his show again. We now move on to foreign affairs. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un traveled by train to Beijing this week for his first state visit to China. This visit comes before diplomatic talks between North Korea, South Korea, and the U.S. And it is somewhat unclear how this recent visit to China will do with regards to those negotiations. In Syria, a car bombing attack on coalition forces killed an American soldier, as the nation's civil war continues to rage on. Trump recently stated that the U.S. would be withdrawing troops from Syria soon, but there has been no indications of any substantive policy shifts or implementation, and Republicans on Capitol Hill have resisted the move. The Republican administration's foreign policy could be charitably be described as a disorganized mess, and the removal of National Security Advisor H.R. McMaster and Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, and their subsequent replacement by neocon chickenhawk John Bolton and Koch-backed Christian fundamentalist nut Mike Pompeo, respectively, are expected to drastically increase the possibility of another unnecessary and illegal war, similar to the 2003 Iraq War. At the White House this week, White House Communications Director Hope Hicks had her final day at the White House. White House officials are worried about the possibility of even more chaos without Hope Hicks to help stabilize the ignorant dotard. Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, is also facing increasing scrutiny. Kushner is now being looked at for multiple criminal issues, including illegally failing to disclose rent-controlled tenants in its properties in New York City, corruption by obtaining loans using his position at the White House, and whether he illegally disclosed classified information to Saudi officials. Former porn star Stormy Daniels also told her story recently on 60 Minutes, recalling her and Trump's encounter and his rather strange behavior, including comparing her to his daughter. Altogether, nothing stated in the interview proved to be particularly surprising. Melania has been increasingly distancing herself from Trump recently, and Trump's public schedule has decreased somewhat as he continues to golf and watch TV and tweet. Trump's lawyers have proven to be unable to deal with the Stormy Daniels story with any level of effectiveness, and the $130,000 payoff involved has been referred to the Federal Election Commission and the Department of Justice as a possible campaign finance violation, similar to the violations committed by John Edwards in 2008. Speaking of illegal campaign activities, Cambridge Analytica, the Bannon-run and Mercer-controlled data firm, was recently revealed to have offered to perform illegal dirty tricks for their clients, and have gained unauthorized access to the data of 50 million Facebook users. The company worked for the Brexit campaign and was considered crucial to Donald Trump's victory through their use of social media micro-targeting, likely based on the illegally obtained data. Cambridge Analytica is now being investigated by US and UK authorities. Facebook is also being investigated by government watchdogs for their role in failing to protect user data and privacy from Cambridge Analytica. And Congress has already called Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg to testify before various committees for the investigation. These social media companies have obtained far too much power and information, and really should be broken up, or at the very least, heavily regulated. In executive agency news, Trump fired his third cabinet secretary so far, firing VA Secretary David Shulkin via Twitter. This comes after Trump has so far removed two national security advisors, the VA Secretary, the Secretary of State, HHS Secretary, and at least one Chief of Staff, and multiple communications directors. Shulkin, an Obama-era holdover with bipartisan support, had come under fire more recently for his expensive travel habits, having the government pay for a trip to Europe that was filled with tourist and leisure activities. However, given the considerably worse abuse of taxpayer funds that other Trump administration officials have been caught doing, it seems somewhat unlikely that his abuses in this realm were the reason for his termination. Shulkin has been actively opposing efforts within the administration to further privatize the Veterans Affairs Administration, efforts supported by right-wing Republicans and billionaire front groups backed by the Kochs, but opposed by Democrats and major veterans groups like Veterans of Foreign Wars and the American Legion. Privatization efforts would likely worsen the health care available to veterans, while padding the pockets of corporations and the wealthy. For his part, Shulkin has gone to bat against the privatization agenda since his removal, making regular media appearances and writing articles in various papers publicizing why he was fired and the anti-veteran nature of privatization efforts. To replace Shulkin, Trump has nominated White House doctor Ronny Jackson. Jackson has no major management experience, an important qualification for overseeing the federal government's second largest bureaucracy behind the Department of Defense. And it seems that Trump largely picked Jackson based on a personal relationship and Jackson's performance at the televised press conference about Donald Trump's health. Jackson's status as a complete neophyte in the politics and policy realm has led to justifiable concerns and suspicions that he is being installed as a figurehead while lower-level political appointees continue to work to destroy and undermine the VA. A reminder, Jackson likely lied to the entire country about Trump's health, giving a far rosier picture than any reasonable observer would glean from his appearance and reported habits. Jackson's nomination is reminiscent of the nomination of Harriet Miers during the George W. Bush era. Miers was Bush's White House counsel and was nominated to the Supreme Court despite being grossly underqualified, primarily, supposedly, due to a good relationship with Bush. Miers' nomination was hastily withdrawn after bipartisan scorn, and Jackson's nomination has also drawn skepticism on Capitol Hill from both sides of the aisle. Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Scott Pruitt is also facing scrutiny. Pruitt has continued to undermine and obstruct the EPA's missions to protect the environment, repealing safety standards and doing the energy industry bidding. Pruitt has also had a considerably larger habit of wasting taxpayer dollars, and his links to lobbyists are becoming increasingly worse, especially with recent revelations about him renting housing from an energy industry lobbyist under incredibly favorable terms that would be extraordinarily unlikely to be available to the general public. Pruitt has previously expressed interest in replacing Jeff Sessions as Attorney General, though his worsening ethics scandals and the resultant publicity could force him out of his current position and out of Washington completely. The prospects of even more firings and the new appointments that result is worsening the prospects of a series of long and unpleasant confirmation battles during an election year, something that nobody on Capitol Hill really want. The Trump administration's war on racial and ethnic minorities continues apace, though, with a series of awful policy decisions recently. The Trump administration is seeking to include a citizenship question on the 2020 census, something that will depress response rates and is likely unconstitutional. The Constitution mandates that the census be of all people living in the United States, regardless of their legal status, and their intentional efforts to depress response rates at immigrant and minority communities is in direct violation of that mandate. Their efforts are aimed at decreasing the representation of traditionally marginalized communities, who just happen to vote Democratic. Furthermore, the inaccurate result would prevent policymakers from being able to make good decisions and prevent states from obtaining their fair share of federal funds, something that would damage public services in many areas. Several states, led by California, are already suing the administration for this decision. On criminal justice, the Trump administration is doing its damnedest to ignore police violence against communities of color, and the DOJ under Jeff Sessions has continued its hostility to civil rights enforcement. On immigration, Trump has decided to end protected status for Liberian immigrants, status renewed on a bipartisan basis for decades. Many of these immigrants have been here for years, have lives and families here, and the Trump administration is trying to deport them. Immigration's customs enforcement is also doing its very best to be as inhumane as possible, recently announcing policy changes to imprison pregnant undocumented immigrants, a shift from the previous policy of releasing them. Immigrants did score a win recently, though, as a federal court ruled that the Trump administration cannot deny the reproductive freedom of pregnant undocumented minors in custody. On Capitol Hill, Congress approved a large omnibus spending bill averting yet another government shutdown. The bill was bipartisan in nature and contained much of Democrats' requests and spending priorities, especially for a party in the minority. Far-right rubes in Congress and the right-wing propaganda machine, of course, have continued to whine and bitch and moan about the bill, and Trump briefly threatened to veto the legislation. Because of the lack of money for his stupid border wall, Trump has largely backed off any real efforts to actually fulfill his campaign promise by getting Mexico to pay for the stupid thing. Trump rapidly backed off the veto threat within a matter of hours, though, and signed the legislation before the deadline, averting the possibility of a third government shutdown so far this year. Trump's now trying to get the military to pay for the wall out of their budget. Between this and his stupid military parade idea, Trump is increasingly treating the Pentagon budget as his own personal slush fund to pay for his dumbest and most unlikely to succeed in Congress ideas. In election news, Republicans are spending heavily in yet another special election seeking to avoid a Democratic upset, this time in Arizona. Despite the fact that Democrats are not expending any serious effort in the district, multiple Republican groups are spending six figures each in an effort to hold Arizona's heavily Republican 8th District, which was vacated by Republican Trent Franks, who resigned after yet another sex scandal. Democrats are not expected to win, and are not really hoping for one either, and have not really expended much effort in the area. But the national environment is toxic enough for Republicans that they aren't taking any chances. In Wisconsin, Republican Governor Scott Walker is finally holding special elections for several state Senate seats, after 3 separate court orders mandating him to do so. Walker refused to hold any elections for the seats which were vacated last year, for fear that Democrats might win the normally Republican seats. And the Republican state legislature was actually considering changing the law so the court rulings would no longer apply. In a similar vein, some Republicans in the Pennsylvania state legislature are pushing to impeach state Supreme Court justices after they ruled and struck down Pennsylvania's heavily gerrymandered Republican congressional map and implemented a far more balanced and fair map for the 2018 elections. Republican efforts to appeal the decisions to federal courts were met with failure, so now they're trying to get rid of the justices who made the decision. The Supreme Court is now poised to strike down Maryland's Democratic gerrymandered congressional map. Democrats nationally are actually hoping that the map is struck down, with the clear possibility that the far more common Republican gerrymandered maps will be struck down in the aftermath of the ruling in Maryland. Speaker of the House and world's worst Christian, Paul Ryan, is also reportedly considering retiring from office, with Republican Majority Whip and self-proclaimed David Duke without the baggage and racist scumbag Steve Scalise poised to take over. All of this is making the November midterms very, very interesting. The Russia scandal has continued to worsen for Trump and his cronies. Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe, who was fired by Attorney General Jeff Sessions on orders from Trump, previously oversaw an investigation over whether Sessions lied to Congress during his confirmation hearings. Note, even though there was no prosecution at the time, he did blatantly lie to Congress. McCabe has also stated that he has notes and emails that directly contradict the Trump administration's official line and version of events. Special counsel Robert Mueller recently filed charges stating that former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort and Trump campaign aide Rick Gates had contact with a former Russian military intelligence officer during the campaign period. The National Rifle Association also recently admitted into receiving foreign donations, including from Russia, and moved money to its political efforts from its accounts that contained foreign donations. The NRA is already under investigation for ties to the Kremlin, and their efforts on behalf of Trump outpace their efforts for any previous Republican nominee. In obstruction of justice news, Trump lawyer John Dowd reportedly offered presidential pardons to former Trump campaign chair Paul Manafort and former Trump National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, with the clear undertone being in exchange for not testifying against Trump. Russian hackers were also recently revealed to have hacked into critical U.S. infrastructure like power grids and nuclear power plants, a revelation that comes on the heels of previous revelations of at least partially successful Russian targeting of U.S. election systems in 2016. This hacking, combined with Russia's recently alleged poisoning of a former Russian agent in the United Kingdom, has led to the European Union, Canada, and the U.S. to sanction Russia. However, the U.S. sanctions are mostly toothless, as the expulsion of 60 Russian diplomats from the U.S. is confined to those particular people, meaning that Russia can simply replace the ones who have been ousted. The Republicans have chosen to respond to all of this by targeting the true villain, Hillary Clinton. Republicans have continued to bitch and whine and moan about Clinton and call for investigations into her, including forcing the FBI to waste considerable manpower and resources to turn over Clinton-related records to Republicans. These jagoffs are really never going to give up going after Clinton or Obama. They're just not. I guarantee you, as the nuclear missiles slide, those Republicans are going to be, the last words on those Republicans' lips will be, but her emails. Finally, this week, Trump proclaimed April to be Sexual Assault Awareness Month. In related news, Bernie Madoff, Martin Shkreli, and Ken Lay have announced that April is Financial Fraud Prevention Month. That does it for this week's news. Thank you for watching the program. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more interesting content.